Hello, and welcome to another installment video in the WASBE collection. I'm Dr. Reed Thomas, Director of Bands at Middle Tennessee State University and a member of the WASBE board. Today, I had the distinct pleasure to chat with composer Nigel Clarke about a couple of his recent works that require not only the usual instrumentation for wind bands, but also the important role of narration that he has utilized in these pieces. His First Symphony, entitled A Richer Dust, and his recent, his recent trombone concerto, Outrageous Fortune, both use narration as an important role as he weaves them into the fabric of the music. Nigel, welcome. It's good to see you again, my friend.
Great to see you again, Reed. Fantastic.
Before we start talking about that narration aspect of your composing, I'd like to talk about our collaborative vices that we've had together. I know when we met a few years ago, we talked about some different things, and the way that we have used collaboration together with this, particularly Richer Dust. Can you just give us your insight on how that became an important aspect of your techniques?
Yeah, it's a very good question. It's actually increasingly more important, that question. I mean, the core to what I do is collaborating with conductors and performers. And in many ways, I don't work with that many people. There's a violinist called Peter Shepherd-Scarebird I've done a lot of work with. In fact, we've collaborated, both you and me, with him. There's a brass band conductor called Luc Vertonghen that I've done a lot of work with. And when it comes to wind orchestra, you basically have been the biggest collaborator over the last decade. What I think happens through collaboration is a coming together of minds which lead to ideas, and ideas hopefully lead to a more inspired way of composing. You and I, we've spent most of our time in many ways not talking about music, but talking about politics or world events. And it's through those conversations that some of the most fruitful things that we certainly put together have come out of that.
Yeah, I remember having the conversations with you about when we very first met, about working together, and me being a relatively new requester of consortiums or commissions. Do you remember the first time we met and I asked you about writing for me? Do you remember your response?
Yeah, I said no.
Yes, you did. You absolutely said no, and I was like, why not?
Yeah, you thought, what a rude so-and-so. I think what I'd really like to do is get to know someone. And I really think that, there's a trend today of, especially sadly in the wind orchestra area, where a band director or a conductor, they commission a piece, they ask for something, it comes in the post, or the composer turns up. And I don't see any relationship between what the composer's writing and the end result in what the conductor and the musicians are doing. So from my point of view, I think to have a very long-term gestation period of talking, coming up with ideas, leads to stronger subject material. And sometimes if we can include the performers, the players, the students in your particular case, I think everyone is then invested in a project, which I think leads to a better success. And certainly from a composer's point of view, the learning experience is more fruitful because you always learn when you ask questions.
Yeah, it took over 5 years for you to write a piece for me after we first met, and a lot of things happened in between to make that become the adventure that it really became.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, what you did, you were kind enough to perform various pieces, and I'd come over. You even, I'm not, let's say, the most comfortable person in the position of conducting, but basically, I found myself on the conducting bill, which, is quite an interesting thing. But that certainly got me to be in touch and having a relationship with your students. There's this weird English guy with a weird accent turning up, doing stuff. And that's all part of the process, I think. And I can say the same as with Peter Shepherd-Scarebird. I did a similar interview with him actually last week. So collaboration, certainly in my mind, the whole subject. And probably over 25 years, I've written in 4 pieces, perhaps 5 pieces. But that is the way to go, rather than how much money is there and me churning out music. I don't think anyone's a winner. And I go again back to saying there is a trend in our world that people have budgets, they commission pieces, people write quickly. And often you get a composer almost plagiarizing themselves and a conductor that is just another piece, another performance. I think it's much better that there's a long preamble into getting to the actual concert event. And even then, that hopefully is the start of that piece with that conductor and that ensemble having a life. So in our particular circumstance, from the first rehearsal to sometimes trying out sketches to changing things to a concert has then led sometimes to recording after that, where the piece is really in a great place, the time it's gone through this sort of pressure cooker, simmering, coming to the boil moment.
Yeah, it was really fun. Excuse me. It's really fun for me to watch this whole process because I hadn't been through it at the level that you and I went through prior to it. And it was really, I had a lot of growth as a musician and as a conductor, and having a better appreciation for the process that you went through. I know you've shared with me about some of the things that this, particularly Richard Dust, opened up to you as a composer. What types of things helped you maybe enhance your compositional language or yourself as what types of new things did you employ that were something you didn't do before?
It was certainly, this idea of not writing you a piece for 5 years, that wasn't necessarily intentional. I think what I felt that if we do something, it had to be a little bit more special than the usual commission. You were, a very strong lifetime friend, and you certainly don't want to just write a piece quickly, get a performance, move on. So we chatted about all sorts of some of the difficulties that either young people are experiencing in the world, or how there's quite a lot of flippancy in perhaps Wynn's world at the moment. And we wanted to, between us, come up with something that was a little bit more interesting. And I think we came up with various ideas. I remember we were walking around at one of the CBDNA conferences, I think in North Florida. And I think from there to what we ended up with was quite a completely different thing. And I remember chatting to my other great collaborator, colleague and friend, Peter Shepherd-Scarebird, who said, that's really interesting you're doing with this, Reed. Let me take you somewhere. And he took me to the National Portrait Gallery in London and said, I want to show you a photograph. And the National Portrait Gallery does what you expect. It has portraits of people, but there was one portrait which had no people in it. It was just a muddy, devastated field of mud and broken trees. And it was titled, I think, A Richer Dust. And the point of that photograph, it was full of people, but they were dust. And it was a First World War battlefield. And people were the dust. And that really became the starting point of a possible idea. Funny enough, that picture had become quite controversial. Quite a lot of traditionalists said, what the hell is that doing in that gallery? But actually it's a very, very profound statement. Peter's wife, Marlene Shepherd-Scarebird, was a writer, and she said that she was able to be excited by this idea, and she came up with an extraordinary set of words. And obviously you and I were collaborating all the time, and that's how we got to this subject of a symphony, or a work in the form of a symphony called A Richer Dust.
Yeah, the text, I remember when you started talking to me about these ideas and how excited you were about utilizing the text both not only as inspiration, because I think the photograph that you, I mean, I get chills right now just thinking about you describing that again. Yeah, it's a remarkable form of inspiration. But then you talk about, when you were talking with Marlene about her ideas and what she was bringing to, I mean, you basically just gave her carte blanche, right? You didn't say.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, you know, I suppose in many ways, in my more negative part of my personality, is I like to control things, or let's call it damage limitation. She ran with it, and I have to say it's very exciting. To the left of my screen, I've just put some of the words up, and the first movement is called "Still We Trudge in the Dark Maze." And after a couple of lines, the words say maimed civilians, killed, murdered, unknown numbers, soldiers missing too, horror, terror, violence, war. You know, these extraordinary words, because what we didn't do was have a singer. We decided that what we would do was opt for a narrator to work with the wind orchestra. Because of the type of conductor you are, you basically, like I let Marlene just run with the subject. You said you got as long as you want to, you know, in the length of work, because again, the composer is often hampered by, I want a piece that's 10 minutes long and it's going to start the second half, and we want it to end loudly. And it's surprising how many times people ask you to write nonsense like that. So to work with a conductor that you trust, know and respect, or collaborate with a conductor where you do what you want, you'll deliver your end, I'll try my best to write the music, and it will be as long as it needs to be. And then in this particular case, to work with a writer doing what she needs to do, I think is a perfect marriage. And I found a little quote earlier, which is Wagner, actually. Wagner philosophized a lot about music and theatre. And he said, music is there to serve the drama. And I think what we decided to do with the students is to create a drama that would not only hopefully have an impact on the audience, but be a little bit more than just another work for them to play in a concert, something that would make them have to confront some of the, let's say, nastier side of life that we have to endure, or not us necessarily personally, but some people in this world have to endure.
Yeah, it was really at the very end. We kind of, this was a last second implementation. I don't know if it was a decision or not, but I remember the night before the first concert, we decided to allow the students, some of the students, to get up and say some of the words within the ensemble.
Yeah.
And we kind of took volunteers, and it was remarkable how many of them really wanted to participate because of their complete buy-in to what you were giving them. And I think it gave a little bit of freedom and some spontaneity as well.
If you remember, we used a little device. If I'd thought about it, I'd have brought it down and held it up for the video stream. Because Richard Dust, the original photograph, was about the First World War trenches, I went on to eBay and I bought a First World War officer's trench whistle.
Yep.
And what's so fascinating by that, only the officers had these whistles. They're metal, they're dated, and they were used and blown for when the soldiers were told to go over the top of the trench. So it's the most terrifying noise when you put the association of being maimed and possibly killed or killing in association with that noise. And we used that whistle quite a lot, or certainly at specific points in the work. And, you know, I remember your students, you know, wanting to touch this whistle, and, you know, it was quite a thing. And that brings me on to another thing which you got involved in, because you're sort of a bit of a Renaissance man. You're not your run-of-the-mill conductor. I said, I tell you what I want in this piece, to represent the sort of, you know, one of these horrible bombs dropping, is a Mahler box. And for those that might not know, in some of the great Mahler symphonies, it's a great big box, and you use a gigantic wooden sledgehammer, and this noise just sort of goes to the core of you. Because you're a fantastic woodsman or craftsman or carpenter rather, you built this fantastic, beautiful, because it's a work of art to look at, even Mahler box, and it's a huge thing. It's more like a thing you'd vault over almost in size, and it's like Thor's hammer. And of course, it was a very dramatic thing. And I remember one of your students, and this again is collaboration, and there's nothing better than stealing other people's ideas. One of the students said, at that moment, when that hammer hits the box, if you just put a little bit of powder, like talcum powder, on that box, there'd be just a little bit of drama, as the almost like smoke going up. And we did that. And now anyone that does that work, you give them that job. And that was one of the students came up with that idea. That's what I think we were talking about earlier, getting people to invest into an idea. I'm going through a process of writing for a group in the Netherlands at the moment. I haven't started it. It's going to be sometime later on in the year. It's not wind orchestra. And I basically have told them, about, when I've worked with conductors like yourself, we talk, we try and come up with a subject. It can't be just a piece that's 10 minutes long. It's got to be more than that. It's got to have an extra added value, certainly to make it interesting and not boring. Anyway, I've probably spoken enough for a few seconds.
Well, I think I had forgotten about the powder thing, and that's I didn't forget about the Mahler box, because I slaved over that for a full summer making that. Coming up, because there are no designs for it, so I had to come up and make sure.
I think you're supplying the Midwest now, I think, with Mahler boxes.
So when we put it together, we want to make sure when we smacked it that it didn't fall apart.
It's a shock. It was a shock. And of course, you got the health and safety, you've got people's ears to worry about. And
oh yeah.
There's lots of issues when you use a dangerous weapon like a Mahler
Yes,
box.
it is remarkable sound. But I'd forgotten about the powder. But the thing that I really appreciated when you came over and worked with the students is that you made it very clear that they were to be as involved as they wanted to be. Mm-hmm. And you were open to, I look back upon my life and I think about when I would be interacting with a conductor or a composer, and, there are these people that you don't really talk to. They're just these, they're these kind of people, and you made them feel so comfortable. That's actually quite a significant growth aspect for the student, to be able to feel comfortable to come up and talk to you and say, hey, what about this idea? Because you could have easily shot it down and no, we don't want to do that. And instead you were like, wow, that really adds to it. And it really did add to the drama of the whole thing. And it was a last second decision.
Yeah, more people should have solid relationships with composers, not this, this sort of, 19th century ivory tower romantic idea of a composer. You know my fantastic joke that I repeat over and over again. The top of the musicians are the performers, then comes the conductors, and at the bottom of the pile are composers, and that's the hierarchy. But actually, it's a good way of looking at it. Really, we're there to serve. Ultimately, the composer's there to serve the conductor, which ultimately there to serve the musician. That is the hierarchy, and you can put the audience in that, and actually administrators are lower.
Yeah, you're talking about stuff that made an impact to you. One of the other things that made an impact to me at the very end of this is, and it literally happened as we were walking on stage, and I remember having to. I don't even think I had the chance to talk with you about it. But one of the things that you had suggested, because when we came up with the poster for the concert, it's a black and white poster, and I'll see if I can get a picture and send it along with this, with the red carnation in the middle. Mm. And you had suggested, what if we had carnations for all the players to put on their black? So I Sure, we made that happen, and we went and got them. We put them on, and as we were walking out on stage, one of the students said, "You know, the way that this piece ends, and it's so powerful and so quiet and so, you know, it just dissolves into nothing. What if we had all the players just randomly take their flowers off and drop them on the stage?" And do you remember that?
I remember that, and I mean, it's sort of, it was a cocktail of, we contrived an ending because, you know, with one of our, you know, many chats or coffees or even beers, when we just, you know, we were discussing how we would do, you know, put this monster together. Suddenly, thing we both felt the last thing you want with a piece like this is the audience screaming and clapping, because it makes a nonsense of the whole thing. It is like a, I'm not a religious person, but it's like a religious ceremony. You get to the end and you wanted to leave people in those thoughts, a bit like certainly in Britain you have the remembrance service and the canons and the bugle calls and the 2-minute silence. So what we did, we built in the 2-minute silence, and I think if I remember right, did people walk off stage at the end?
That was an idea, but we decided not to do that. We thought it would be
because of logistics. But people lifted the carnation. So it was almost like the red poppy field. The stage was, I suppose, the red carnation, almost like a blood, if you like. Or blood stains on the, you know. And I remember someone sobbing in the audience. I remember a sobbing noise, you know. And in many ways, that I think that proved the dramatic success of that thing. And you know, if I don't think as a composer I would have thought of all that on my own, or necessarily you as a conductor. And it's a dialogue. And you know, we mentioned two things that the students came up with: dropping the carnations and the dust. And that's great for their growth to know that, you know, there's this big thing being created, and they can have the authority is the wrong word, the
freedom.
Freedom, an environment where they feel that they can suggest things and they're not going to be ridiculed and things like that. In many ways, and I mean this in the best sense, there was a very interesting performance that the band of the Irish Guards did. That's the British Guards that changed the guard at Buckingham Palace. And they played it in the Guards Chapel in London. And what is fascinating about the Guards Chapel in London, it had been bombed, and the musicians, the original musicians, died in that church in the Second World War. And to think that the military were performing quite a pacifist type work. Yes, in fact, it's very pacifist. It's questioning the whole arms industry involvement and, you know, industry, weapons, money, that whole thing. And we had the military performing that work in a place where people had actually been bombed and died, you know. And there's even from the days of Republican terrorism that happened on the British mainland, there's even a flag of when one of the Horse Guards regiments were blown up and soldiers and horses were killed, and the flags in it. And to think these artifacts are in there, and you have that First World War whistle and the flowers on the floor, you know, with the military. To me, that was a, you know, a rather interesting evening. You know, I thought it would never happen. I thought the British military would never have the courage to put that event on, but they did. So that was sort of interesting, you know, in many ways.
Yeah, that's quite an endeavor for a group like that to perform. Good for them.
Yeah. I think I would say it's quite controversial, actually.
Very controversial.
I mean, one of the things that Malene put in the words, I'm just going to tell you some of the other movement names. There's a very sort of dark movement called Living Picture of the Dead, you know, almost sort of this ossuarium of bones and, you know, statistics of how many people had died. Like there's 125,000 people died in the Tokyo firebombing in the Second World War. It gave the death toll to date at that particular time of 4,486 people that had died in Iraq. You know, rape figures, 250,000 cases reported in 65 countries annually, and then likening comparing that to smoking related death. I mean, there were really heavy duty, things in that movement. The third movement, she dealt with what I call isms, isms like racism or extremism or sexism, things like that. And it was called Other Flowers Rise. And it was like, you imagine a beautiful garden, if you don't tend and look after it, a metaphor for intellectually looking after it, these stinging nettles and horrible things come through. And, so she touched on that anything, if it goes to its extreme, republicanism, democratism, conservatism, labourism, anarchism, atheism, Buddhism, all these things, at their extreme edges, they're all ghastly things. It was a sort of call for moderation. And again, some of that we had to explain to, why those words are there for some of the young people. Yes, the Catholic Church has burnt people at the stake, in the past, and Protestant stuff, and she beautifully wove that into something about, we have to feel, and that directly we stop feeling. I mean, I know America is a little bit of a divided country like Britain at the moment, and I think those words that she wrote make us have to contemplate more how we have to intellectually keep, our garden sort of clean and tidy, as it were. The last movement she wrote was called The Lark Still Bravely Singing. And that was a very optimistic set of words. It's what makes us human. I'll just read a few of her words. It says, candles in the dark of winter, kiss under a full moon, kicking up dead leaves, whirlwind, masterpiece, cups of tea, quiet sunset, my child's first giggle. And she goes on all the things that make us human, not those isms that we were talking about. But we decided that, again, with our collaborative chatting, that yes, her words ended in a positive way, but what would have probably been wrong for such a work is to do a Steven Spielberg beautiful ending with lots of sugar and we'll all live happily ever after. I think it's got to be more like one of those Carrie movements of films, like The Exorcist, where you think the danger's gone, but then there's a noise or the thing's still under the surface. So what we did with the orchestra and you as the interpreter, it ends beautifully and then suddenly takes us right back to trench warfare. And ends in this almost nuclear bomb darkness, aftermath of nuclear. And that's when we had our silence and then the carnations at the end being dropped on the floor. So, I think it goes back to that Wagnerian quote, music is there to service the drama. And I think it sort of is a symphony, but actually it's a drama. And I think that's something we can all, the students, you, myself, and your university, Middle Tennessee State University, can all be very proud of, that we created a happening, an event.
Yeah, I think it's one of the highlights of my career for sure. It's turned into, it started off as a simple, wow, I really like your music, would you write for me? To this spectacular, it was an event. It wasn't just a piece. It ended up really becoming quite an event. And I know we toyed with whether we could record it or not, and we decided to give it a go, and we made it happen. And so,
I've done another similar type, but I forgot to mention earlier. I should mention another collaborator is Matthew George up in St Thomas and St Paul, and he's commissioned 2 or 3 pieces. Because actually, I went through a period saying it's not time to write for you. Let's wait and do something special. And with Melina again, we did an opera for a trumpet soloist and wind orchestra. In that particular case, we had a whole movement with childbirth and cutting umbilical cords and movement with priests being tortured and all sorts of things.
You're such a happy guy.
So in many ways, the answer to solving that mission, it was, deeply embedded in all the experimentation and ideas and thoughts that we had with the, and I think, Matthew did a great job with that. But I personally think as a composer, it's good not to repeat oneself. So, everything's got to be different. I think what worries me a little bit is in the wind orchestra world and brass band world, a lot of composers of a certain age start repeating themselves. And I think as you get older, you have to try harder to push yourself to the edge of your ability and challenge yourself in a different way. So, certainly that was a different type of challenge. I had a soprano in it, so I had a little sort of vocal side to it and things.
Yeah, it was. I remember you talking about it and giving me the. Again, you allowed someone to freely collaborate about an idea. It was Marlene again, correct?
Yeah.
So it's really become quite a unique. So you did another piece with narration, but this one was a little bit more scripted, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely, very different. I mean, I think these are the only pieces I've done that have been narrated. It's just I think some subjects call out for something a little bit different. And there's a British trombonist called Brett Baker, and he's the principal tromboner of the Black Dyke Mills Brass Band, second oldest brass band in England, and certainly one of the world's most successful brass bands. And he wanted a trombone concerto, and I did the thing, really, okay. I always look annoyed, upset when someone asks something, because I say it's a burden. Oh my God, what am I going to do? And I said, well, I'll do, and what we did, we called it Outrageous Fortune, which that title, those words come from Shakespeare's Hamlet. And we used two of the soliloquies from Hamlet, the famous, to be or not to be. So it starts off with a Shakespearean quote with all these effects, quite a long time before the trombone comes in. The trombone is effectively Hamlet. In the middle, the trombone is just trombone, and then the actor doing to be or not to be. And then it's sort of this sort of big birth to death arch thing, and I think that's quite fun, because who needs another trombone concerto? Because there's so many great works out there. I think if you're going to do something, I think you need to find another reason for it living, for being, and it forces you to sort of think how to solve these different sorts of problems.
Well, Nigel, I think we're about out of time, but I just wanted to express my extreme gratitude, both for writing the pieces that you're writing, for contributing to our repertoire, for being a great friend, and for taking the time to speak with us today. So,
I will say one other thing out of collaboration, if that's okay. We've started off collaborating, and then we ended up recording. We've done several discs on Carter Classics label, because you and I have got this passion that we need to get other people outside of our world listening to the wind orchestra. It's so important that we don't become this insular community, and that of course is then led to a collaboration that wasn't with me, but is with David Maslanka, that you then collaborated with, and also put him on this record label, and bringing his music. And I think it's actually this month, or only a few weeks ago, the late recording of David's music, or sadly the late David Maslanka's music, that you've done. And so I think if we hadn't collaborated, that disc wouldn't have happened, because none of these connections would have been 100%,
made. 100% true.
And I think the beauty of what we do, we as a community of people that love this type of ensemble, we need to get it out away from our people and to a wider audience. And I think with the problems of COVID and lockdown and the whole pandemic thing, is going to be much harder for professional expensive orchestras to exist in the same way that they've done before. But like you burn a field at the end of the summer, at the end of the harvest, you burn the crop to help the new seeds come forward. And in many ways, I think that the wind orchestra will have a lot of opportunity, because effectively it's cheaper. Community wind orchestra is cheaper than professional orchestra, that they will be able to take some of the slack until those larger professional organizations will financially recover. So I think we have a lot of exciting times ahead of us in our music making to keep the arts alive, you know, and we're sort of cheaper, and that makes it a little bit easier.
Yes, I think we're very adept at filling those needs in many different ways, and I think we're ready to do that. So
yeah,
terrific.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. It's great, but also, you know, thank you for your collaboration and all the other work that you've been doing, because, you know, it's not just me you've collaborated with as a composer. You've worked with so many composers, you know, both young and old. You know, and it's, you know, so I was talking the other day to someone outside of our world. I said, well, what's really difficult is finding good conductors, but not only good ones that are open-minded. That's the really, really difficult thing. There's lots of people that can do all the nice hand movements and, you know, perhaps put music together, but actually having people are more visionary about their approach. And I think that's a very difficult thing for certainly certain types of composers to find. And with you, and actually Matthew's another one of those gentlemen, people that are willing to take a chance, you know, be it about a childbirth piece or Oblivion, you know, in your case. So lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Take care. We will talk again very soon.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.